So I'm waiting for this. Never know when it is really on YouTube because it's setting up the meeting. So today is the second part on this very short series on how to write a scientific manuscript. For today, you had to prepare the homework, the structure of the manuscript you're going to work on, and I'm just going to say a few general things which I've seen of some of the manuscripts that I have commented on, and also patterns which I have seen in previous seminars on the same topic beforehand. So the aim of getting this structure is really to have the structure, and the structure means two things. It has to be full. Everything has to be in there, from the title, your name. I mean, you know what is your name and your association and the different paragraphs, and everything should be in there. And it's better to work from the beginning on one file than to have different files. So I wouldn't call this file, basically, that's the structure. I would call it the manuscript file, and then you can call it version 1, version 2, version 3, and so on, that it develops. Another point that often arises is that in the structure, people give too much information. So the idea of the structure is that it's really short and clear. So instead of writing 2 or 3 sentences about what the paragraph 1 should be, it's enough to have one short sentence that everybody can understand. This is the topic of this paragraph. So for the beginning, for the structure, it should, when you especially do the structure for the introduction, be very short and very precise. And today we will learn about, and we will look about how then to write this in another way that can get clearer, and then we'll start to get more detail, and to the more detail we will only come after this. So because it's very important with the structure that you see that it's logic and that it has a proper flow, and that all parts of the manuscript follow the same order. Like you should have in the final paragraph of the introductions, like you have aims 1, 2, and 3, and then these aims 1, 2, and 3 should be recognizable again in the method section, methods for aims 1, for aims 2, the statistical analysis for aims 1, 2, 3, and then the results section, that the results come in the same order again. So this is the structure is really the time to think about how will I present my results, but also my story. And this would then become clear from the beginning. Sometimes when you work on a more complex project, like you had a master thesis where you typically did measure 100 things and perform 1,000 analyses, it's difficult to focus and on what is really most important. And also sometimes it might not be clear what should be the first result to present, which one the second one, and so on. One technique one can use here is the so-called email technique. When you get kind of confused, how shall I present this in which order? A good idea can be that you write an email to a colleague of yours or a good friend and tell this person in the email what you want to do. Alternatively to writing an email, you can also just, but it's not possible now in the area of COVID, but otherwise you could also just go out and go to the office next door to you and talk to your colleagues. Because typically when we start to talk or write an email, we automatically put the information in the correct order that the other person needs to understand it. And this order is also what we need in the manuscript. We need the order of the information in the flow that the other person understands what we are really doing. So this can be a trick when you don't know how shall I order my result 1, 2, 3, and 4, that you write an email to somebody who doesn't know the topic and you quickly want to explain your friend what it's all about, and then kind of you will order it the way that the other person can understand it, and that's the way it also should be in the manuscript. We will talk about more tricks about how to write and methods you can use for writing in, I believe, 3 weeks. When we talk about now in the week 6, when we talk about writing the discussion, that will become especially important, and I will probably repeat this. Now we talked about last week, and you sent me the structure of the entire manuscript, and now we come to the structure of sentences and of paragraphs, because also sentences do have an order, a structure, and a sentence has, I can make this maybe bigger so one can see it better. A sentence has two main elements: the topic, which is normally what is known, or people should be able to relate to it, and the news. And the news of a sentence should become the topic of the next sentence. So in the first sentence, the topics and news are often the same. In the first sentence, I mean the sentence of your manuscript in the introduction. So the introduction could be the first sentence: animals show a high diversity of social systems. So then social systems is the topic in the news. And then the next sentence, this topic would be explained in more detail. Then it would be about what are social systems. Well, here's the example: reproductive competition. So this is the topic marked bold. Occurs when the reproductive output of an individual is decreased due to the presence of a conspecific. And then this is in the next sentence again the topic: since reproductive competition and conflict, that's the new, that's something that's coming up now, are inevitable in group living species, social groups are characterized by conflict about over who reproduces. And so the news of this sentence then becomes the topic of the next sentence, and then it might be explained or put in more detail. The structure of a paragraph is similar. A paragraph starts with a topic sentence, so the first sentence should say and prepare the reader about what is the topic of the paragraph. And it starts with a terminator sentence, which typically summarizes what you wanted to say in this paragraph. It is, especially in the introduction, often a conclusion. And between the topic sentence and the terminator sentence, you will then later bring examples and explanations. So, for example, here could be the topic sentence: the idea that a low level of reproductive competitions favors group living has formed a theoretical framework for studying animal sociality. And the terminator sentence is: however, to date, there has been little empirical evidence that reproductive competition influences sociality intraspecifically. And in between, there are examples and explanations how one comes from this topic of reproductive competition to the terminator that we don't really know how it influences intraspecific variation. Here it's about we can use this topic to understand variation between species, and then the conclusion, the terminator, is how can we use it to explain variation within a species. Now, specific sections like the introduction, they follow the very similar order. They are structured like paragraphs. We have a topic paragraph in the introduction. Typically, we mention what this study or this paper is about. And this is also often where students have a problem, because they know too much, they read too much, and it's problematic to focus. When you write this topic paragraph, be aware that what you mention here, the reader later expects that this is what you've been working about. So there might be like reproductive competition might be a very important topic of your study. And you know that for reproductive competition, to understand it, it's nice to measure reproductive skew, let's say in striped mice or what other species. But if you did not measure reproductive skew in your study, then don't mention it there, because what you mention in this first paragraph, the reader expects that you will bring new results and new insights about it. So you really have to prepare the reader about what you're going to tell him, what is new, and as such, avoid any other concepts that might lead to wrong expectations. So you have the topic paragraph, and then comes examples and explanations in the coming paragraphs. And these examples, explanations should be about what you studied. So if the first paragraph is about reproductive competition, or let's say reproductive strategies can be so many things. Then in the following paragraphs, you bring examples that relate to your study. For example, reproductive competition can lead in different degrees of multiple paternities. If you measured multiple paternities, if you did not measure multiple paternities, then you should not mention it in the introduction. You might then later in the discussion mention that this is also an important aspect which you didn't study here. And then the introduction finishes in the Terminator paragraph, which summarizes the aims of your study, or in the discussion, the Terminator paragraph finishes in what is new, what after your study can be said that couldn't be said before. And especially for the introduction where we're working on at the moment, everything you bring in your Terminator paragraph must have been mentioned before in one of the previous paragraphs. So don't bring a new question in the Terminator paragraph of the introduction if you did not introduce this question beforehand. One example, Linde Standive and me, we are working now on a manuscript of her master thesis that's about bachelor male groups in striped mice, where sometimes it occurs that only males are forming a group together. And one thing which she didn't have in her structure, which I think is important, and I put in the Terminator paragraph of the introduction, is that bachelor groups can come into existence by two ways. Either males that are not related join to probably warm each other. These are unrelated males. Or there's a group of mice with males and females, and all females disappear due to predation and males remain, which I think is an important aspect. And because we want to talk about this aspect, we also have to insert a specific paragraph about these different pathways, how social units can come into existence. So what you should do until next week is that for the introduction, where you have the structure, and you should have for every paragraph one short sentence what it's about, you should write the topic sentence and the Terminator sentence only. You should write these sentences, and you should also mark them in different colors. And the advantage is that when you have the topic in the Terminator sense of every paragraph, then your introduction should already make sense. We will then next week, I will ask, I don't know if I can ask all of you, but some of you to please read your introduction consisting only of topic and Terminator sentences. It should be relatively fast, and it should be self-explanatory, and we should understand what the study is about. And if you have achieved this, then you have all the information you need for the introduction, and then you can fill in between topic and Terminator sentence the examples and explanations. The advantage of following this technique is you avoid that you bring too much information because you know so much, because you read now for 1 year only about reproductive tactics if it's in striped mice or European pond turtles. You know so much, but not all of this information is needed for the reader. By just focusing on the topic sentence and Terminator sentence, you will avoid to bring an overflow of information. Now I wanted to I think I should have this from one of my previous seminars. Okay, yeah, this paper in the meantime luckily has been published. So the strategy kind of worked. So I had here, I think that was the last seminar I gave, had this paper on geographic variation, social flexibility, was published this year in behavioral ecology and sociobiology. And here I have this structure, like we always talk about. All these things are already in there. And here is how I started working on the introduction. I had before the sentences, what is the topic of every paragraph. I deleted them. You can leave this short sentence in there in bold just to remind you. And I marked the topic sentence in yellow and the Terminator sentence in blue. And so I had for every paragraph the topic and the Terminator sentence. I started with this, and later I filled in the information in between. I'm now going to read this to you, and then you can decide whether this makes sense to you and you know what the study is about. I didn't read it now for more than a year, so I'm a bit nervous. Maybe it doesn't make sense. So Animals show a high variety of social systems, including solitary, group living, and even eusocial species. Variation in social organization is obvious between different species, but can also occur within species. Typically, for each species, one form of social organization has been described, but we know now that many species can have several forms of social organization. Social flexibility can be an adaptation to an environment varying in time, but could also be an adaptation to other forms of variation. Ecological variation between local subpopulations could favor the evolution of social flexibility if individuals disperse from one subpopulation to another. While geographic variation could lead to the evolution of social flexibility, this is difficult to study, as several subpopulations would have to be monitored simultaneously. Studying whether social flexibility occurs in a geographically heterogeneous habitat could best be achieved in a small mammal species that has several subpopulations that are separated from each other within a relatively small area. In sum, the striped mouse offers an ideal system to study whether social flexibility could be an adaptation to geographic variation. Here we tested whether geographic variation in population density is related to social organization in striped mice. We predicted that the more striped mice were group living in a subpopulation, the higher the local population density was, replicating the correlation between population density and sociality reported previously. I mean, what kind of becomes evident is that want to understand it best, one needs the examples in between, which is not a surprise. So like here, social flexibility, while here we talk about variation, that this is not exactly the same, but I think it should kind of become clear. And the other thing to look at here, also the other advantage when you organize it like this is that, like in a sentence where the topic and the news occur, and then the news become the topic of the next sentence, paragraphs should be organized in the same way, meaning that the topic of a paragraph should be the news or the terminator from the previous paragraph. And when you do it like this, you can check this if this is the case. So here the terminator was variation in social organization between species, and here we come again with variation in social organization, but now within species. The terminator can be an adaptation to variation in time, but also in other forms. And here the other forms would be variation between subpopulations. So then we come to terminator of geographic variation, and is the terminator of this sentence, which is difficult to study. And then here the news is to study it would best be achieved in a small animal species that has several subpopulations in a small area. So this is the second part, that by first writing the structure of the introduction by focusing on topic and terminator sentence, you can also see whether the flow from one paragraph to the next paragraph makes sense and is good, because the terminator of a paragraph should become the topic of the next paragraph. Good. Does anybody have some questions here? So the homework for you, if you work on a manuscript, should be that you write for your manuscript, if it's your report or your paper, the introduction like this with the topic and terminator sentences of all your paragraphs, checking whether the entire story makes sense and whether there's a good flow, that the terminator of a paragraph becomes the topic of the next one. And again, I would like to ask you to send me this by Wednesday night, Wednesday evening, such I can see between Thursday, Friday, when I have time to comment on it. Okay, so I wanted